Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Lunar Display and MindNode. I'm John Voorhees, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hey, John. How are you?
Very well, very well. I'm hanging in there. So we need to get back to our iOS wishes because, with all this talk of marzipan and iOS 13, it's that time of year when all I do is think about WWDC and what's on the horizon because it really drives so much of what we do all year long. And, we've heard our rumors so far, but there's a lot of things driven both by things like your iOS 12 review, where you pointed out the shortcomings of iOS 12. That's a big driver of what we want to see. But there are other things as well that have come up over the course of the year. And today, we're going to cover two more topics. Today, we're going to go through both HomeKit and Shortcuts. How does that sound?
Who cares about the Shortcuts app? I never use it. I'm all about the Apple script, man. I don't care about Shortcuts.
Oh, all right. 150 shortcuts, I think, prove you wrong, Mr. Viticci. I was amazed at how many there were in there, and I know you were just under 150, and you came up with a few extras to round out that list for when we launched that. And it's people seem really excited about it, which is great because it's not only are a lot of them things that you can just kind of use right out of the box, but they're also, as Dr. Drang said on Twitter, a good source of inspiration for people building their own stuff.
Yeah, I was very happy to see that kind of response.
Yeah, no, it's been really fantastic. Why don't we start, though, with HomeKit? Because you know me, I'm not a fan of the Home app. I wrote a big story about that at one point because the Home app still drives me kind of crazy. I find navigating around it hard. I don't like using the Watch app. There are a lot of things in HomeKit that could get better. And it's not just about the app, though. There's a lot about the way HomeKit works itself that I'd like to see expanded on. To give you some examples, first of all, and we'll get a bit deeper on this in the Shortcuts section, but I would like to be able to do more with the Shortcuts app straight with HomeKit because it's pretty limited at this point. One of the things that I find hardest to deal with too is state awareness. There's not really, for instance, when you build a scene, you have to oftentimes build a scene that builds something up and then have a separate scene that kind of tears it all down because HomeKit doesn't necessarily understand the state of all the devices that are part of a scene. And this is probably a wish that is maybe a bridge too far because I don't know that HomeKit is built in a way that would allow that sort of thing to happen. But, I can wish. This is about wishes. And I'd like to see those frameworks evolve to a point where there's state awareness, which allowed me to do things based on the current state of a particular device, which isn't really possible at the moment. There's even things like the Home app is fairly basic and simple in the way it works. Matthias Hochgatter's Home app is really good because it does things that are possible with HomeKit that you just can't do in the Home app. And that's in terms of automation. I'd like to see that Home app both be a little easier to navigate, a little more intuitive in terms of the way it's organized, because you're dealing with homes, you're dealing with rooms, you're dealing with scenes, groups, all these things. And one of the things that I discovered when I wrote that article about what I didn't like about the Home app was that there's a reason groups are kind of buried in the UI. It's because groups are great if you have like a lamp that has two light bulbs in it. So you have two smart light bulbs and you're always going to want them on or off, or always want them the same color at the same time. Because once you make something a group, they may not as well be individual items anymore. They really are a true group. It's one item. When you deal with them in a scene going forward, you can't adjust individual components of the group. There's very few situations, I think, where a group makes sense unless it's something like that lamp with two light bulbs in it. And I'd like to see some of that be a little more flexible going forward, because it's very hard to set up automations and scenes with things like groups at the current, in the current state of the app.
Yeah.
something that you talked about quite a bit, and I'd like to maybe get your thoughts on a little more, is I know this is in a beta, but the HomeKit integrations for televisions is pretty limited right now. I mean, you can turn on the TV, turn it off, and you can switch inputs, but you can't, for instance, I don't think, turn it on and have it in one action, turn on the TV and switch it to HDMI 2, for instance, right?
That is true, and I have to agree with that. That I'm surprised that at this point in the iOS 12.2 beta cycle, for example, things like asking Siri to switch to a specific input is still not supported with the Home app, and if you have a compatible HomeKit television. And I really think that Apple should, and this is a common theme, I suppose, of the the features that we're discussing for this iOS 13 wishes. There should be more personalization and more customization of
Right.
just the experience in general. For example, I would like to customize the remote that I get from HomeKit if I have a HomeKit television, and to have, for instance, buttons to quickly switch to specific inputs in the remote that I can open from Control Center. Or I would like to have the volume button instead of the info button that I never use because I don't want to see the info screen of my LG TV. So just being able to have deeper control and deeper customization options over how the remote looks and the remote works, I think that will go a long way to make HomeKit support for TVs better. And to your point about how, from a design standpoint, the Home app is a little bland and a little boring even, my dream is to have this kind of modern dashboard where every control can be, again, customized, and every accessory doesn't have to have the same shape, the same square tile. I would like to have sliders. I would like to have more icons. I would like to have colors. I would like to have a free placement over a grid or a dashboard. And something like I think it's called Home Dash.
Right.
It's a third-party app for HomeKit on iOS. And something like that allows you to have different kinds of virtual knobs and sliders and touchpads. Really something that gives you the idea of a personal dashboard to control your home, because that's the idea. You're automating your home and you want to be able to have controls that make it easy to do so. But if everything is a tile, then it's not really easy to identify at a glance, and it's not fun. It's not a good way to present different types of information. Right now, everything in HomeKit is either a tile, or you press on the tile and you get a slider with 3D touch. And that's not really, I mean, there could be so much more. It could be so much fun. It could be so much more customizable. So this is my main issue, that everything looks kind of the same and it's boring and it's slow to use.
Right. And I think something that goes hand in hand with customization is I'd like to see more of Apple's apps. And this goes like from the OS level all the way to the individual apps, to learn more about what I do, right? So maybe the Home app should learn that at this particular time of day, I'm likely to want my lights at this level of dimness, or I'm going to watch TV after I ate dinner. So maybe surface that in the favorites automatically, so it's easy for me to turn on my TV. Or I go to bed at a certain time, and so turning off all the lights on the first floor automatically appears in my favorites. That kind of machine learning brought to bear on the shortcuts, the scenes, and the devices that you've got in the Home app would be really nice. And I guess related to that too are two things that I would love to see come to HomeKit. One is presence, so that,
Okay.
and by that I mean your HomeKit devices know when someone's home, for instance. So right now, all of this stuff kind of works on a per person basis, but I'd like to be able to run scenes when the last person with an iPhone in my house walks out the door. I mean, I happen to have a household where everybody's got an iPhone, so once it detects that no one's home, I'd like it to be able to say, check to make sure all the lights are off, or the heat is turned down in the wintertime, or something like that. And you could even, take that a step further and do things like identity. And this really goes to Siri, and maybe we'll get to this a little bit in Shortcuts as well. But I'd like Siri to be able to tell members of my family apart, right? So It understands their preferences and their patterns of usage and customizes what's available to them in the Home app based on who they are as well.
Yeah, that would be really nice, actually.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by our friends at Lunar Display. Having extra space when you're working on your Mac is super useful. It can make even the most tiresome tasks more enjoyable by removing the need to have to tab switch constantly. If you've got an iPad, I've got a solution for you. It's Luna Display. Luna Display gives you that extra screen real estate with just a tiny bit of hardware. Luna Display provides crystal clear image quality, reliable performance, and wireless flexibility. You just pop a little piece of hardware into your Mac and you're good to go. And if you don't have access to a Wi-Fi connection, no worries. You can just connect with a USB cable. And the great thing about Lunar Display is how portable your new setup is. You can be as productive at the office, in the studio, or when you travel. It's a super smart way to work with more screen real estate while you're on the go. Luna also acts as a complete extension of your Mac. It's going to support your external keyboard as well as the Apple Pencil and touch interactions. So you can interact with your Mac with a swipe of a finger. And the all-new Liquid Video engine brings significantly reduced latency and a faster screen refresh rate. I was amazed when I first saw the Lunar Display. I saw a prototype early on at WWDC a couple of years ago, and it's so tiny. You hardly even know it's there plugged into your Mac. It's amazing how well it works and how quickly you get used to the ability to pick up your iPad and roam about your home working on your Mac, but not on your Mac because you're using an iPad and you have the added benefit of touch interaction. It's just fantastic. Listeners of App Stories can get a 10% discount on the Lunar Display right now. Just go to lunardisplay.com and enter the promo code AppStories at checkout. That's lunadisplay.com and the code AppStories at checkout for 10% off. Don't put this off any longer. Go there right now, lunadisplay.com, and use that promo code AppStories to get your 10% discount. Our thanks to Lunar Display for supporting the show.
I have another one of the things that I really would like to see for you is presence. For me is integration with AirPlay, AirPlay 2 and the HomePod.
Oh, right.
I would really like to be able to have automations that include music and that include things like playing a specific playlist on a specific speaker or a specific group of speakers. Just the idea of, and this is something that, Sonos, actually, I should say Amazon can do, I think, with their own home speaker ecosystem. Just Apple has all the pieces right there, and the HomePod actually shows up as an accessory in the Home app because the Home app is where you go to manage the HomePod and to update the HomePod, but it's got no actions. And instead, I think there should be a way, and I will bring this up again when we talk about shortcuts, but there should be a way to say every morning when I run this scene, or if it's an automation, do this automatically. I want to be able to turn on the lights and, I don't know, turn on the coffee maker and then start playing this playlist on shuffle with a low volume. That kind of stuff.
Right.
Because one of the advantages of the Apple ecosystem is that you have all these pieces that talk to each other securely with a single HomeKit framework, and you have Siri that works everywhere. So why is music and playing audio on these home speakers? They should be part of automation and scenes with the rest of the HomeKit framework.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into the identity thing I was talking about too, because that's one of the issues we've always had with Siri and the HomePod is that it's really only tied to one person. Because, for instance, wouldn't it be nice if I could say, watch Netflix, and it turned on my TV, turned on my Apple TV, started up the Netflix app, and automatically switched to my Netflix account instead of Jennifer's or one of my kids. So, but I can't do that. I mean, that's a really simple example where it can take it another step further, where all of a sudden Netflix is ready to go, and it's my profile because I was the one who asked to turn on Netflix, and I can start watching the shows that I've saved.
Yeah, that would be lovely. Some of these things I'm now doing thanks to Homebridge.
Right.
So basically, I can sort of fake my way around it by, for example, I created a single HomeKit scene that all it does is it switches the input to the built-in Netflix app in my on my LG TV, and then in Shortcuts I can use the action called Run Home Scene to trigger that scene, which will switch to Netflix on the TV. And then I made that shortcut part of a longer menu that contains a bunch of TV actions. So I have a single list that says volume up or volume down or Netflix or YouTube. And I can use this list from a widget. So I can control the TV from the widget on my iPhone. And that's beautiful. It works, but it's a hack, and it should it should be a native functionality of the Home app and the Shortcuts app.
Yeah, it is, and I am laughing only because I'm recalling the story you told when Sylvia asked you why the volume for your TV was a light bulb.
Yes, that is absolutely true, because you're adding an unsupported accessory. TV volume is not an accessory type in HomeKit at the moment. So the Homebridge plugin that I'm using is, what's the easiest way to indicate a slider that allows you to turn something up or down? Well, I suppose it's a light bulb because you can
Right.
change the intensity of a light bulb. So they use the light bulb. Yeah, all of this should be native stuff in HomeKit and Shortcuts.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, since we've already talked a bunch about shortcuts, why don't you pick that up and we can dive into some of our wishes there, which I know it's a really long list. So maybe we ought to go kind of fast.
All right, I'll speed it up. I'll start simple. Folders. Really, there should be a way to organize your shortcuts in folders.
Yes.
Whatever. I don't know if we're going to call it Shortcuts 2 because it's already technically version 2 because it was Workflow version 1, Shortcuts 2, but whatever, the next major version of Shortcuts in iOS 13. Folders and the ability to schedule shortcuts. This is something that people are now sort of faking, using either shortcuts that run in the background, but I've never really spent time with this. There's one called, I think, Chronios or something like that. You can find it on Reddit. Or people are just using Launch Center Pro or things like Do, for example, to schedule shortcuts in the sense that they're scheduling a URL scheme, and that URL scheme launches a shortcut at a specific time or location. All of this, the scheduling for a specific time, scheduling with as a recurring thing, or scheduling when you arrive at a place or when you leave a place, all of this should be a native shortcuts feature. And not only this, but I think Apple should build a system that allows you to attach shortcuts to other types of events, other types of triggers, like a calendar event is due, run a shortcut, or an alarm has been triggered in the clock app, fire a shortcut. The ability for maybe even for apps to define their own triggers. I don't know, like you receive a DM in Tweetbot, or, that kind of idea of something happens in a third-party app, use that as a trigger to run a shortcut. So that kind of idea I think could be interesting.
Yeah, I would like to see it tied even to the phone or the contacts app too, right? Like if you have a whole bunch of telephone calls scheduled, I could, tap your phone number in the contacts list and automatically start a toggle timer that was, started tracking my time for our phone call, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that would be this kind of stuff. I think it would be really nice to have.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by MindNode. You know what's great about MindNode? It brings delight and ease to brainstorming, turning your thoughts into clear and beautiful pictures of your ideas. The strength of the app is that it lets you explore your thoughts and see where they take you. MindNode does the heavy lifting, taking care of the structure and presentation. This is precisely why I love MindNode so much. The built-in themes and structure of the mind maps are so nice that I never find myself fiddling with their design. I simply enter my ideas and make the connections between them. The app also has excellent keyboard controls on iOS and the Mac to make getting your ideas down super fast. Customize your mind map with beautiful themes, custom designed stickers, your photos, and rich text. MindNode is available on the iPhone, iPad, and Mac and fits right into your favorite workflows too, with integrations with apps like Apple's Reminders app, Siri Shortcuts, Things, OmniFocus, and Ulysses. Whether you're gathering ideas for your next book, planning your wedding, or studying for an anatomy class, MindNode helps you capture what's on your mind. I've got a little preview for you too. MindNode 6 is just around the corner. It's coming in late April. It's a free update for MindNode 5 users, and it includes great new features like multi-selection on iOS and an all-new focus mode. It's a great new update that MindNode fans are gonna love. But there's more. I've got a special deal just for App Stories listeners. Until the end of April, new customers can extend the free trial on MindNode from 2 to 6 weeks by going to mindnode.com/appstories. That's a full 4 weeks of extra time to try MindNode before you decide to buy. But I bet you'll jump in sooner because the app is just that good. Again, that URL to extend the MindNode free trial from 2 to 6 weeks is mindnode.com/appstories. I'll put a link in the show notes too. MindNode. It starts with your thought. Our thanks to MindNode for supporting the show.
And then I guess we got to move on to the bigger things.
Right.
Something that I keep mentioning is having interactivity when you're triggering a shortcut from the widget or from Siri. So right now, if you have a shortcut that lets you pick an option from a list, or lets you pick something from a menu, or asks you to type some text, and you try to trigger that shortcut from Siri, you will be taken to the Shortcuts app because Siri does not support interacting back and forth with the shortcut. It can only perform the shortcut inside Siri if it's a self-contained thing that requires no user interaction. I would like to have user interaction in Siri. So I would like to, all these actions like choose from list, choose from menu, and ask for input, they should have a Siri voice context. They should have support for doing this, choosing from a list, choosing from a menu, saying text back to the shortcut right inside Siri. And I guess there should also be a way to trigger a shortcut with a Siri phrase, as it currently is already possible, but with a custom input. So programmers would say to be able to pass arguments to a script.
Right.
So the idea of you're triggering a script, you're triggering a shortcut, but you're passing some input alongside that. So for example, if I have a shortcut called text that brings up the messages app, but if I say text John, Siri should be smart enough to know I'm triggering the shortcut called text, but I'm passing John as input. And that input means bring up the messages composer directed to John. Now, this is already possible, but bear in mind, this is just the idea of you're passing along some input to be used as the shortcut input, but you're saying that to Siri. So the idea of you could slightly customize the shortcut at runtime based on what you say to Siri as a trigger. I think this is a very complex thing to pull off, but the Shortcuts team, they are a bunch of geniuses. So I think they can pull it off.
So we completely expect them to do this in the next, I don't know, month or two?
Next point update.
All right.
For sure. I guess the other thing would be a proper Shortcuts framework and Shortcuts API for developers. Not a shortcut API in the sense of Siri shortcuts, but actual integration with the Shortcuts app. So right now, there's two types of third-party app integrations that you have in Shortcuts.
Right.
One of them is like Evernote or Todoist. They are web-based actions. And you can tell because you are asked to log in with your account. You're actually signing into your account from Shortcuts with a web view. Or you have URL scheme-based actions. These are, Things, Ulysses, OmniFocus, all of these apps. They provide X callback integration. And so you have these visual actions in Shortcuts. They are pretty, they are nice. They have visual fields. They support variables. But at the end of the day, they always launch other apps using X callback URL. They are glorified URL schemes, but still URL schemes. I would like to see something like the Evernote or Todoist or WordPress actions, but for native apps, not for web apps, not for web APIs. What I'm arguing for essentially is all the actions that Apple apps have, like Apple Music or Reminders or Health,
Right.
but for third-party apps. So visual actions, native integrations, but for third-party apps. So imagine if you could create something in OmniFocus without actually launching OmniFocus, or imagine if you could retrieve your tasks from things without actually launching things. It just happens natively in the background. So the idea of an actual framework for developers to build into their apps that lets them offer actions in the Shortcuts app without waiting for Apple to implement their X callback commands or without having to build a web API. So I think that would be the next frontier for integrating Shortcuts with third-party apps on iOS.
Yeah, it doesn't feel that far-fetched really either, just because it's a little bit like taking extensions and uncoupling them from the share sheet so that you can summon them from really anywhere within iOS.
I guess the big problem there is you're dealing with the user maybe doing something unexpected because you're passing data back and forth.
Right.
So you're poking a hole in the sandbox, but in this case, it's really out of the developer's control. Like, what happens if John takes a Ulysses action and maybe the Ulysses developers are saying, well, we expect users to be able to, create a document in Ulysses. But then John comes in and says, well, you know what? I'm just going to pass 2 gigabytes of data, of raw HTML data to the Ulysses action. What happens there?
Right.
So like, you introduce all of these complications, but I really think it's doable because Apple is doing it, and Apple has been doing it for years because they have their native frameworks, EventKit for calendar and reminders. They have Music Kit and for Apple Music. They have HealthKit actions. They have all of these native actions that do not require launching apps. So I think it's time to open it up to developers, really.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of putting the right parameters around what's being passed around. So it's not something like you suggested, 2 gigabytes of raw HTML. It's some sort of, 2 kilobyte plain text file or something.
Yeah, and I'm super confident that if there's a team of people that can do this, it's the Shortcuts team at Apple.
Yep.
A few more. So easy stuff that I can run through. This one you suggested, better notes actions. So like being able to actually save rich text in the Notes app or retrieve rich text and attachments from Notes. That would be nice. New icons and colors. More glyph choices for your shortcuts in addition to folders. Deeper integration with the file system. Right now, Shortcuts can be integrated with iCloud Drive and files, but if you want to do so in an automatic way, in a programmatic way, you are sandboxed to the Shortcuts folder in iCloud Drive. I would like, given the proper permission system and given, the proper permission controls, I would like to automate any file and any folder from my iCloud Drive. I don't want to be contained in the Shortcuts folder, and I don't want to pick files manually either. I want to be able to script like I can on a Mac, for example. I want to say, yes, I want Shortcuts to have access to my entire iCloud Drive. Then what I do is up to me. But that is not currently possible, and it should be possible. And I guess in terms of deeper integration with the system, I could also argue in favor of I want to be able to run Shortcuts from the lock screen, or I want to be able to run Shortcuts anywhere on my iPad with a combination of keyboard shortcuts, like I can on the Mac, for example. I can run my Keyboard Maestro macros or my Apple scripts anywhere with a hotkey, and that should also be possible on iOS. And then finally, and that's where I'm done, John, advanced actions. So more stuff for the power users, really. I want to have a keychain module to store sensitive and private data within Shortcuts. This is something that Ole Zorn, the developer of Pythonista and Editorial, and I think even Simon Sobring for Scriptable, they have been doing for a while. So I want to have a secure keychain for Shortcuts to store usernames and passwords, that kind of stuff. I want to have a database system in Shortcuts. I want to be able to store records and, key value pairs, that kind of stuff, instead of having to create my own databases, my own JSON dictionaries, and store them as text files, because that's what I've been doing. I want to be able to have this as a native feature. Zapier, for example, they do this on the web. They have a module called Store, I think, and it lets you store data in your Zapier account. And I want to see something similar for Shortcuts. And a new visual editor for regular expressions, because right now it's just like a plain text field
Right.
when you want to put together some regex.
Right.
And finally, and also a new editor for JavaScript, because why not? And maybe, just maybe, you could have, JavaScript automation for apps on iOS, like on the Mac, and you could maybe write and execute that JavaScript from Shortcuts, just saying. But really, finally, new tools to make and modify PDF documents. It's something that I do all the time. I want to be able to have better controls for PDF generation, and I want to be able to have native actions to extract text, to extract highlights and comments and notes, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot of suggestions, Federico. Those guys are going to be really busy.
I'm not even done. There could be more, but you wanted me to stay within 30-something minutes, and this is what you get.
Okay, Federico, that's a lot for people to think about. But that's the thing, is that we've seen the potential for Shortcuts and HomeKit, and if only Apple could take that a little further. And I'm really hopeful that this is the year, because obviously we've heard the rumors that this is a big year for iOS, in particular on the iPad, and I hope that means, at least in part, that it's also a Shortcuts year. I want to thank our two sponsors again. That's Luna Display and MindNode for making this show possible. As always, you can find me and Federico over on MacStories.net, and you can find both of us on Twitter and Instagram. Federico is at Viticci, that's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.